Oh, is that something that you've really had to unpick?
Yes, but I also don't believe I realised the impact it's had until recently. So, you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that I write an essay series called Truth and Clues. And one of the things that I did a couple of months ago was write down some of the topics that I would like to cover. And one of them was around menstruation and menopause. Because I wanted to share my story, but I didn't really even realize what my story was until I started thinking about it. And it's only been in starting to write some of that down have I realized that some of the feelings that I've had with regards to my body and menstruation and sex my whole life, I guess since I was probably 9 years old, are still very much embedded in me, and I'm only starting to explore and unpick that now. And it has brought up quite a bit of emotion because you don't realize, again, I think I said this before, you don't realize what you're not thinking about until you actually are prompted. I don't know what prompted me really to put that on my list of things that I would like to explore and write about. But until you get to that point, sometimes these things can sit below the surface for a very long time, and probably with some people forever.
I think that's really interesting, and it goes back to what you're saying about shame and that contributing to you perhaps feeling a bit scared. And shame is something I've talked about with other guests on this podcast, and it's so fascinating. It's terrible, but it's so fascinating that we can be so ashamed of something that is so normal and natural, and this almost unlearning that we have to do about what is normal and why we actually feel this shame.
Absolutely. It's interesting too, because what I feel is really important is that even if we're not conscious of some of the, feelings that we have, and I guess particularly perhaps what you would class as a negative feeling, although I don't like classing feelings that way, but let's just, for the sake of this conversation, I think people understand what I mean when I say a negative feeling, but you hold that in your body. So even though you might not be thinking about it or talking about it, it sits there, and it sits in your body. And I feel like sometimes when we do get to the point where we are ready to perhaps explore these things, have a conversation, write about them, it can be hugely emotional. I mean, I know that I've only just started the work that I want to do for myself in this area, but sometimes I feel like I could almost cry. I mean, when we talked at the beginning of this conversation about my first period, and I mentioned, the child's knickers with the little flowers on them, I mean, I could feel my eyes well up, and I feel like that is probably part of it, that we don't realise how much of this we actually hold in our bodies. And then when you are at the point you're willing to explore it, it can be very difficult. And perhaps too, the older you get, the more you start to feel, and I think this is something I probably haven't verbalized before, you do start to feel, why have I not thought about this before? Why am I only doing this now at 30 or 35 or even 50 for some people? I mean, I don't think it matters whether you're menstruating or perimenopausal or you've gone into menopause. It's still always a good subject to explore, even if it's only to kind of face some of those feelings and work through them. It's got to be healthy, because then you're getting out of your body.
What do you think? Sorry, let me just rephrase that. You getting out of your body and rephrasing and rethinking. You recently, just to connect to that, you did a 12-month cross-continental cycling expedition with your husband.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how that potentially connected to the work that you've been doing now and unlearning and rephrasing?
Yes. So what I think is probably most relevant is that, so we set off in May last year, so May 2018, and I mean, we are both fairly fit and active people, but we certainly weren't cyclists. We had road bikes we took out once every 2 years, and finally we decided, right, we've wanted to do this great big trip, but let's do it by bikes. That was a bit of a last minute add-on, but we just decided we wanted to do it under our own steam, and we had no real clue what we were doing. I mean, we'd done research, but what I mean by that is, for me personally, I didn't know how my body would respond. And what I found really interesting is that when you're on the move nearly every day, and I did look at my menstrual cycle and we did try and plan around it, but sometimes you just can't. And we weren't going exceptionally fast. I mean, we were probably covering 60, 70 kilometres a day, which by most people's expedition standards is quite slow, but we really wanted to just enjoy it. But being on the move, being outside, moving your body, having less distractions, you really do start to tune into your body. And for me, I really did start to tune into, why am I feeling tired today? Is it my cycle? Have I perhaps not slept properly? Am I not hydrating myself properly? Am I not eating the most nutritious food? And I really felt how everything comes together in that sense. And I became far more aware of how all of these things really impact us, probably more than we realise. And I think so much these days is talked about in terms of, you've got to do all of these things to be more productive. Sleep better, eat better. If you drink more water, you'll be more alert. But for me, it became more about, how do I look after my body in the best possible way so I feel my best, so I can actually enjoy my life the most. And I felt like that was a real switch for me from, how do I get the most out of my body energy-wise, to how do I actually work with my body so I enjoy my life more. And I think that's probably the most relevant thing in terms of this conversation that came from that trip.
That's really interesting, the kind of everyday, almost checking in with your body. Well, checking in with your body, but connecting back with, okay, I feel like this, so I need to do this. And that's something that I actually wish more of us would do more often, because I see this in my clinic and I help my clients connect the dots. And then it's education, and that's a really important part about it, because you don't know, oh, I might be feeling tired because I'm about to get my period, or I have a lot of energy today, and that's probably because I'm on day 14, day 15 of my menstrual cycle. So that's one of the reasons why. But that's where education coming back to the idea of, more education, more discussion about this is really powerful. So you did every day, well, or nearly every day for 12 months, you would do this and try to adapt your day as appropriately.
Yeah, so we would have long stretches where we'd cycle for perhaps 2 or 3, 4 weeks, and we would have a day off here and there. And we did both listen to our bodies, but then we might have 2 or 3 weeks off the bikes, perhaps because we'd done a particularly tough segment of the route and just felt like we needed downtime, or we did some volunteer work. So there were different times where we were off the bikes for longer periods. But yes, we both really started to realise, I might really fancy that pizza, but actually it's not the thing that's going to make me feel great tomorrow when I'm on the bike. And I think for me, that wanting to nourish myself in a way that made me enjoy the cycling more was a big difference in the way I thought previously. And, I am someone, I would say, was very disconnected from their body for a very long time. I had a long period of challenge with disordered eating and body dysmorphia. So it's really only in the last 5 or 6 years that I've started to actually listen to my own body's cues and realise how important they were. And I do really feel that going on that trip was just another chapter in that, to understand that, as I said before, yes, you can look after your body in a way that improves your performance, whether that's at work or creatively or in the sports arena, any of those things. But you can also do it in a way that actually just makes you feel more connected to your body, you feel more rested, you understand your energy rhythms, and it just makes life more enjoyable. And I mean, for me, that's just in a very kind of anxious, depressed, stressed out world, that's a very important message, I think, because so much of what we hear now is about life hacks and maximizing our time and productivity. And I feel like a lot of that is important, but it does very much take us away from our own body's cues.
So, on the other side of your trip, how have you taken what you've learned about your body into your day-to-day life back in London?
So 2 ways. Great question, because I'm all about what can I learn from life on the road that I can replicate in day-to-day life. So 2 things. One is that I used to avoid exercise when I was coming up to my period. And because I had a few times when we just couldn't have breaks when I knew that was coming, so we would have shorter cycling days. And what I found was my period was so much lighter if I was exercising up and through it. So I continue to do that now. I do it knowing that, I might not go out for a 10K run, but I will still get up and walk. I might go to a yoga class. Like, I will do things to keep moving, and that has had a really positive impact. And the other thing for me is this thinking of looking after myself so I feel good and, more prepared to go out into the world and do my work. So as you mentioned in the introduction, I'm writing a book, and I think about it the same way. I think, okay, Fridays are my all day, fully committed to writing days. So looking after myself in the week leading up to that is important, so that I wake up on Friday morning and I feel fresh and good, and then I can actually do that thing that I really love, and the words flow. It's a bit like I was saying before. If I didn't look after myself when we were cycling, I really missed the magic of so many moments because I was having to push harder. And I feel like it's the same with writing. If I look after myself better, it's just a more enjoyable experience. Yes, it's still hard, but I just feel I come to the page with more energy, more enjoyment. And I think those 2 things have definitely changed the way I live my life.
What would you, if you think back to your 9-year-old self, what would you say to her, knowing what you know now?
I would say to her, what a wonderful thing. I feel like it would be something that I would like her to celebrate. I also feel like I would say to her, this is, as I said, this is a really positive thing, and I would sit down and explain why. I would find other women for her to talk to so she could understand that this is something that happens to all women. I think it would be also just about saying to her, as you go through this process, ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask. So I guess the main thing would be is, treat it like a celebration.
Wow, treat it like a celebration. I really love that. So if listeners could take one thing away from listening to you on this podcast, what would you want that to be?
That it doesn't matter at what stage of life you are. I do really feel exploring that moment when you first started this journey, when you first got your period, until now, wherever you are, is something worth exploring, because the more we do this at every single age, the more willing we are to look at ourselves and perhaps remove anything that might be holding us back or down or just pressing heavily on us. So that's the first thing, is that by doing this exploration, you will release some of those things. And the second thing is, I feel like the more we do this work, the more we can talk to other women. And that's really important. So even though I'm 46 and, as I said, don't have a family of my own, this has been a great beginning of an exploration where I can start to talk to my sisters. One in particular has 3 young girls, 8, 6 and 4. And I can now have conversations with her and hopefully work with her on how do we have different conversations with her daughters, or how does she have those different conversations. And and it just means that we're not just putting the onus on education in terms of schools, but also there are a whole load of mothers out there right now whose daughters are probably